It began in the kind of mansion that whispered wealth and power through every marble column and gilded mirror. Julian Cartwright, heir to a sprawling empire built on old money and old prejudices, was sipping his espresso with a smugness cultivated over decades. Across the polished hall, Lila, the black maid, moved with practiced grace, her hands steady as she arranged flowers in the grand foyer. Her eyes betrayed nothing, but they always seemed to observe more than they let on. Julian had never considered that the quiet, seemingly invisible woman cleaning his floors had a life as intricate and defiant as the silk patterns on the drapes he so loved. "Watch the polish, Lila," he said, his voice a mixture of irritation and condescension. "You might stain the marble with your clumsy hands." His smirk was effortless, honed over years of exercising power over those he deemed beneath him. He thought her timid. He thought her harmless. He did not think at all. Lila stopped mid-step, gripping the vase so tightly her knuckles whitened. She could have snapped, insulted him, quit right then and there, but she didn't. Instead, she smilayed a smile that carried years of endurance, heartbreak, and quiet rebellion. "Of course, Mr. Cartwright," she replied, her voice calm, polite, but with a hardness that only those who had survived storms could master. As Julian turned, laughing at his own cleverness, he didn't notice the soft click of his son's footsteps behind him. Aaron Cartwright had always been the sensitive one in the family, a trait that had set him apart in a household dominated by entitlement and pride. At 23, Aaron carried both the weight of expectation and the spark of rebellion, the latter often ignited by people society wanted him to overlook or despise. Today, he froze in the doorway, watching his father mock the very person who had raised him to understand resilience and dignity. Aaron's gaze lingered on Lila, and something in the air shifted. He knew her, though not as Julian did. He knew her as his mother's friend, or more accurately, as the mother he never got to call his own. Lila had protected him, nurtured him, and loved him in the shadows of a world that would have never allowed them a normal life. But until this moment, he had not imagined the collision of his two worlds. The oppressive legacy of his father's wealth and the quiet courage of the woman who had given him life. Julian's laugh shattered the moment, cruel and sharp, echoing off the chandeliers. "Careful with that vase, Lila. You wouldn't want to ruin perfection, would you?" He leaned closer, eyes glinting with disdain. And then it happened, the first crack. Lila's composure, built over years, wavered not for herself, but for the secret that had always been her shield and her burden. She met Julian's gaze squarely and said, "I'm careful, Mr. Cartwright, but perhaps you should be careful too. You never know what truths might stumble into the light." Julian blinked, a twitch of uncertainty crossing his features. He thought he understood the world. Power dictated obedience, wealth dictated respect, and lineage dictated authority. Yet, in that second, the familiar lines of control blurred. There was something in Lila's voice, a certainty, a knowledge that reached beyond his arrogance. He leaned back, scoffing, dismissing the chill that ran down his spine. Aaron stepped forward, heart hammering. The room felt impossibly large, yet impossibly small as he whispered, almost to himself, "Mom!" The word was a spark. Lila's eyes softened but did not break. She nodded, the simple acknowledgement shaking the foundation of the carefully constructed hierarchy of the mansion. Julian's face went from amusement to confusion, disbelief, and finally horror as he connected the dots. You are," Julian stammered, unable to form the accusation or the insult that had once flowed so easily from his tongue. He had humiliated countless servants before, but never someone like this. Someone whose life intersected with his son in ways he could not control or dictate. "Yes, I am," Lila said, voice unwavering. "And I am the mother of the boy your son loves." Silence. The kind of silence that presses on the chest and fills every corner with dread and anticipation. Julian's mind raced, a torrent of anger, fear, and a creeping sense of injustice that the world as he knew it could be challenged. Aaron stood, trembling slightly, torn between the loyalty to his father and the love that had grown too powerful to deny. You," Julian began, faltering. He had never faced a truth like this, a collision between his prejudices and reality. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. Gold chandeliers reflected a light that could not illuminate the growing chasm between father and son, between authority and morality, between hatred and love. Lila straightened, composed yet impossibly human in her grief and strength. She had prepared for this confrontation, but not for the humiliation she had endured for years at the hands of a man who never imagined she could challenge him. Now everything had changed, and yet she bore no malice toward Aaron. Her son's love was pure, a light Julian had never known. The story was not just about confrontation. It was about revelation, courage, and the quiet power that comes from surviving and nurturing love in a world designed to deny it. Lila's life had been a tapestry of hardship, each thread a challenge met with resilience. Her son's life had been a secret rebellion against a society and a family that sought to erase him. And now, these threads intersected in the grand hall of a mansion, the tension palpable, the stakes higher than any boardroom battle Julian had ever known. Aaron stepped closer to his mother, the warmth of recognition and relief radiating from him. He could feel the weight of the world on Lila's shoulders, the sacrifices she had made, the battles she had fought alone. And he knew that for the first time he could stand with her, not just as a son, but as an ally in a world that demanded conformity and punished love. Julian's mind whirled. The carefully maintained facade of control, wealth, and superiority crumbled as he confronted not just the truth of Lila's identity, but the implications for his son, his family, and the legacy he had tried to cement. Anger warred with fear, pride clashed with recognition, and for the first time he felt powerless. This confrontation, explosive yet understated, marked the beginning of a journey none of them could have foreseen. The humiliation, the revelation, and the shock were not the end, they were the catalyst. Julian would have to reckon with his prejudices, Aaron with his love and loyalty, and Lila with the hope that courage could indeed reshape the world. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Every polished surface reflected not just opulence, but the fragile humanity beneath. And in that reflection, each character confronted not only each other, but the truths they had long avoided. The necessity of courage, the weight of love, and the possibility of redemption. The revelation hung in the grand hall like a storm cloud ready to burst. Julian's face twisted with disbelief and fury, yet there was also a flicker of something he had never felt before: uncertainty. His mind raced, imagining the whispers in society, the scandal that could tarnish the Cartwright name, the fragile image of superiority now cracking under a truth he had never anticipated. He cleared his throat, trying to assert control, but the words came out hollow. You've been hiding this." Julian's voice was sharp, but it lacked the authority it once carried. He gestured vaguely at Lila, the very air around her charged with defiance. This changes everything. Everything." Lila's eyes softened, her calm unwavering. "I was not hiding to deceive," she said. "I was protecting my son. And protecting him means protecting his happiness from people who would judge him before knowing him." Aaron stepped closer to his mother, his presence a silent shield. His heart thumped violently, every beat a mixture of fear, relief, and defiance. "Dad, stop," he said quietly, but with an edge that caught Julian off guard. "She is not your enemy. She has always been my family, even if you couldn't see it." Julian froze, the words slicing through the armor he had built over decades. He wanted to respond, to lash out, to assert dominance, but Aaron's gaze held him in place. There was no fear in those eyes, only clarity and unwavering love for someone Julian had dismissed as insignificant. "You cannot possibly understand," Julian began, then stopped. The room seemed to constrict around him, suffocating in its opulence. He looked at Lila, really looked at her, and for the first time saw her not as a servant, but as a woman of strength, dignity, and unshakable courage. Lila's hands rested lightly on Aaron's shoulders, a subtle anchor amid the tension. "Try, Mr. Cartwright," she said softly. Try to understand that love does not conform to expectations, that families are not always defined by wealth or race, but by commitment, care, and truth. Julian's lips pressed into a thin line. He had been raised to believe in power, in control, in lineage. But here, in this moment, he faced a reality he had never accounted for: love and courage that defied hierarchy and prejudice. He clenched his fists, but they shook, betraying his internal struggle. Aaron's voice grew firmer, the resolve in him unwavering. "You've built walls around yourself, Dad. Maybe it's time to tear them down. Look at her. Look at me. Can you see that we're not asking permission to love, to live, to exist? We're asking you to see us for who we are." Lila nodded, her gaze piercing through Julian's defenses. "And know that shame and ridicule have no place here. Not in my son's life and not in mine." Julian's face reddened, a mixture of anger and confusion. He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing that there were no insults strong enough to undo what had been revealed. His power felt irrelevant, meaningless in the face of truth and courage. Outside, the wind howled against the mansion, rattling the ornate windows. It was as if the elements themselves were echoing the turmoil inside. The household staff, previously invisible and silent witnesses, exchanged nervous glances. Some had long suspected that Lila was more than she appeared. Others were simply relieved that someone had finally broken the silence. Aaron took a step forward, linking hands with his mother. "We've hidden long enough, Dad. Pretending that things can be as they were is over. You can fight, resist, or accept, but the truth doesn't bend to fear or tradition." Julian recoiled slightly, as though struck. He wanted to resist, to assert control, but the raw honesty in Aaron's voice, the quiet strength in Lila's presence, left him disarmed. The foundations of his life, built on wealth and control, were shaking. "You think you can just waltz in here and teach me about morality?" Julian finally spat, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Do you know what it means to carry the Cartwright name? To uphold our reputation?" Lila's eyes softened but did not yield. "I know exactly what it means," she said. "And I also know that reputation built on fear, prejudice, and humiliation is empty. True legacy is measured in courage, compassion, and integrity." The words struck deeper than any insult Julian could have wielded. For decades, he had equated power with respect, wealth with worth. Now, confronted with the undeniable dignity of Lila and the unwavering love of his son, he felt the first stirrings of humility. Aaron squeezed his mother's hand. "Dad, we don't need your approval to exist, but we do hope for your understanding. It's not too late to learn." Julian's jaw tightened. He looked around the room, at the opulent chandeliers, the marble floors, the gold-trimmed furniture, all symbols of a life carefully curated for appearances. And he realized, with a pang he had never anticipated, that these trappings meant nothing in the face of human truth. For a long moment, silence reigned. The tension was thick, but in it lay possibility, the chance for reconciliation, the possibility that understanding might triumph over prejudice. Lila finally broke the stillness. "I have endured mockery, scorn, and humiliation. I have raised my son with love, patience, and courage. And now, I stand here, not to beg, not to demand, but to assert that our lives, our love, and our dignity cannot be diminished by fear or prejudice." Julian's hands trembled. He wanted to argue, to reassert his authority, to cling to the comfortable hierarchy of his world. But the sight of Aaron, eyes bright with hope and defiance, reminded him that some truths were too powerful to ignore. He exhaled slowly, the first real breath he had taken in years. I see," he said, voice low and uncertain. "Perhaps I have been blind." Aaron's heart leapt. It was not total acceptance, but it was a beginning, the fragile first step toward understanding, toward reconciliation, toward a world where love could be acknowledged rather than hidden. Lila gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Seeing is the first step, Mr. Cartwright. Acceptance is the journey. And it starts with acknowledging our shared humanity." The room, once a stage for humiliation and power, now felt charged with possibility. Shadows shifted with the afternoon light, falling across the marble floors and gilded walls like a promise of change. Julian looked at his son, then at Lila, and realized that the lessons of a lifetime could not always be measured in wealth or status. Some lessons were forged in the fires of love, courage, and truth. And perhaps, if he had the humility to learn, he could begin to rebuild not just relationships but himself. Aaron's voice broke the quiet again. "We can't change the past, Dad, but we can shape the future. And I want you in it not as a judge, but as my father." Julian's eyes met Aaron's. For the first time, there was no sneer, no arrogance, only a tentative recognition of the depth of his son's humanity. The walls he had built around his heart were starting to crumble. The encounter was not the end of conflict. There would be questions, struggles, and resistance. But the spark had been lit, a spark that promised understanding, empathy, and the courage to confront prejudice in all its forms. Lila, standing tall, felt a rare lightness. She had lived decades in a world that sought to suppress her, diminish her, erase her identity. Now, for the first time, she felt that the love and dignity she had fought to preserve could breathe freely. Aaron squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement that they would face the challenges ahead together. They were more than mother and son. They were a force bound by love, courage, and a refusal to be hidden. Julian, alone in his thoughts, felt the weight of legacy, expectation, and pride press upon him. And yet, beneath it all, he sensed a possibility he had never considered, that the measure of a family was not in wealth or status, but in the capacity to love, to understand, and to embrace truth. The mansion, with all its grandeur and cold beauty, seemed to exhale. A new chapter had begun, not one dictated by fear or prejudice, but by recognition, courage, and the fragile, luminous promise of change. Aaron looked at his mother and then at his father. "This isn't about victory or defeat," he said softly. "It's about being honest, and about standing together even when the world expects us to fall apart." Lila smiled faintly, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and hope. "And it's about knowing that love, truth, and dignity are stronger than any insult, prejudice, or expectation." Julian's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign of humility in a man who had long equated power with respect. He did not yet know how to reconcile his old beliefs with the new reality, but he could feel the possibility of change. And for the first time, he was willing to try. The wind outside softened, the sun breaking through clouds, illuminating the grand hall with a warmth that mirrored the tentative thawing of hearts inside. In that light, Aaron, Lila, and even Julian glimpsed the fragile but undeniable truth. Love could survive, courage could triumph, and families could redefine themselves against the weight of prejudice. The tension had not vanished, but it had transformed. No longer a weapon of humiliation, it had become a force of reckoning, reflection, and the first steps toward reconciliation. And in that transformation lay the seed of hope for acceptance, for understanding, and for a future where love and dignity could flourish despite the shadows of the past. The following days were a whirlwind of emotion, tension, and subtle shifts in the mansion. Julian moved through his home as though it were a foreign landscape, each familiar corridor now a reminder of truths he had long ignored. Every polished surface reflected not wealth alone, but the undeniable reality that his son and Lila had carved a life of courage and love that demanded recognition. Aaron and Lila navigated these days with cautious hope. They knew the path to reconciliation was not a straight line. Julian's pride and prejudice were deeply ingrained, and every interaction was a delicate dance between assertion and patience. Yet they faced it together, a united front strengthened by years of hardship and the bond that only a mother and son who had survived against the odds could share. Lila began to organize her work with meticulous precision, but now her movements carried a quiet authority. She did not speak out of defiance, but every gesture conveyed confidence and dignity. Julian noticed it, though he would never admit how deeply it unsettled him. He found himself watching her, sometimes catching himself thinking not about her status as a maid, but about her humanity, her intelligence, and the unwavering strength in her eyes. Aaron, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to bridge the chasm between his father and the mother he loved. He spoke gently, appealing to Julian's conscience, recounting moments from his childhood that Julian had long forgotten. The way Lila had soothed scraped knees, read bedtime stories when nannies were unavailable, and instilled values of empathy and honesty that Julian had never recognized as contributions to his son's upbringing. "You see her differently now, don't you?" Aaron asked one evening as they walked through the sunlit garden. "You're finally seeing her as more than a servant." Julian's jaw tightened. He had not expected to be challenged by his own son's insight, nor by the truth of Lila's character. I see," he admitted slowly. "But understanding is not the same as acceptance." Aaron nodded. "True, acceptance takes time, but acknowledgement that can happen now. And it starts with respect." The first moment of real change came unexpectedly. One morning, Julian overheard Lila speaking firmly yet calmly to a younger staff member who had made a subtle, derogatory remark. Her words were measured, her authority undeniable, and for the first time Julian felt a pang of admiration rather than irritation. He realized that respect did not require fear, it demanded recognition of courage and character. As the days passed, Julian's internal conflict became increasingly evident. He found himself questioning long-held assumptions about class, race, and loyalty. The world he had known, one where wealth dictated status and prejudice justified behavior, was giving way to a reality he had never anticipated. The undeniable strength of love, the courage of those society often overlooked, and the transformative power of truth. Aaron and Lila continued to grow closer in their shared struggle. They spent quiet evenings in the library, discussing the future, reflecting on the past, and planning how to navigate the complex web of relationships surrounding them. Every conversation reinforced their bond and strengthened their resolve. They knew that Julian's acceptance was only part of the journey. The larger world, family, friends, and society would need to be confronted with truths that defied expectations. Then came the evening that would define the turning point in their lives. Julian had invited Aaron and Lila to the drawing room, ostensibly for a family meeting. The room was dimly lit, heavy with the scent of polished wood and old wealth. Yet there was an undercurrent of anticipation that even Julian could not deny. "I have been thinking," Julian began, his voice measured but uncertain, "about what I have seen these past few days, about the truth that has been revealed, about respect, loyalty, and love." Aaron and Lila exchanged a glance, subtle yet significant. They had prepared for confrontation, but this tone was unexpected. Julian continued, struggling with words that had once flowed easily as commands but now faltered under the weight of humility. "I have lived my life believing that control and authority were the measure of worth. But I see now. I was blind. Perhaps I have been too rigid, too focused on appearances and tradition, to notice the courage and humanity right in front of me." Lila's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the tentative acknowledgement of wrongs long endured. "It takes courage to recognize the truth, Mr. Cartwright," she said softly. "Acknowledging the past is the first step toward change. But it is not enough. Actions must follow." Julian nodded slowly. "You are right, and I intend to act. I want to make amends, to restore dignity where I have allowed shame and prejudice to take hold. But I am learning. I ask for patience as I try." Aaron felt a rush of relief and hope. The father he had longed to connect with was beginning to emerge from the shadow of pride and prejudice. "Patience is fair," he said, "but honesty and openness are equally important. We can guide each other through this as a family." For the first time, the mansion did not feel like a fortress of oppression. It felt like a space of possibility, where dialogue could replace judgment, where love could outweigh fear, and where courage could reshape relationships long governed by power and prejudice. The next weeks were a delicate ballet of interactions, reconciliations, and revelations. Julian made a concerted effort to engage with Lila respectfully, listening without interruption, acknowledging her experience, and gradually offering gestures of restitution for years of condescension. Each act, small though it may have seemed, carried immense significance. One afternoon, Lila guided Julian through the kitchen, demonstrating not just her skill but her ingenuity. She spoke about budgeting, planning, and managing the household with a level of expertise that far surpassed the assumptions Julian had long held about servants. He watched silently, absorbing lessons he never thought he needed, and for the first time, a deep humility settled over him. Aaron watched, his heart swelling with pride and relief. The father who had once wielded authority as a weapon was beginning to wield it as a tool for understanding. The transformation was slow, sometimes frustrating, but undeniably real. The pivotal moment came during a family dinner. Julian had arranged for the entire household to gather, signaling a shift in both acknowledgement and intent. The table, long and imposing, was set with care, yet the atmosphere crackled with tension and expectation. Julian addressed the gathering, voice steady but layered with sincerity. "I have been blind," he began, "and at times cruel. I have allowed prejudice, arrogance, and fear to guide my actions. Today I seek to change that. Respect, dignity, and love will no longer be measured by wealth or status in this household. I ask for understanding as we move forward." The staff, many of whom had long endured subtle humiliations, exchanged surprised glances. Some whispered to one another, tentative smiles forming as hope began to bloom. Lila remained composed, though a small, almost imperceptible tear traced her cheek. She understood the magnitude of this gesture was not perfection, but it was progress. Aaron reached across the table, taking his mother's hand in a quiet show of solidarity. The gesture was simple yet profoundly powerful. It symbolized not just their unity, but the potential for a family divided by prejudice and expectation to begin healing. Julian watched the exchange, his own emotions roiling beneath the surface. Pride, shame, and love intertwined in a complex web, but slowly, he began to understand that legacy was not inherited wealth, but the strength of character and the capacity to love without prejudice. The days that followed were not without challenge. There were moments of friction, reminders of old habits, and the lingering shadows of societal judgment. But each challenge was met with dialogue, empathy, and a willingness to learn. Julian's transformation was gradual, sometimes stumbling, but undeniable. Aaron and Lila continued to nurture their bond, strengthened by adversity and validated by Julian's evolving understanding. Together, they navigated the complexities of love, identity, and family in a world often hostile to both. Their courage became a quiet revolution within the walls of the mansion, challenging long-held assumptions and reshaping relationships in subtle but profound ways. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the mansion, Julian stood on the balcony, reflecting on the past weeks. He realized that true power did not reside in wealth or social standing, but in humility, empathy, and the capacity to embrace love in all its forms. Aaron joined him, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "It's not easy," he said softly. "Change never is, but it is worth it." Julian nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. "I see that now, and I am learning step by step." Lila appeared behind them, a gentle smile on her face. She did not speak immediately, letting the moment linger. Then she said, "The journey is long, but courage, love, and truth will guide us. Together, we can reshape not just this family, but the world we touch." Julian looked at her, truly looked, and felt a profound shift within himself. Respect, understanding, and love had replaced fear, prejudice, and arrogance. The mansion, once a symbol of rigid hierarchy, now felt like a place where hearts could heal, where truths could be acknowledged, and where the human spirit could triumph over decades of ignorance and judgment. Aaron squeezed his mother's hand, a silent acknowledgement that they had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. And Julian, standing between them, felt the first stirrings of redemption, a promise that the past could inform but not define the future. The wind rustled through the trees outside, carrying with it a sense of renewal. Shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer dictated the present. In their place arose the possibility of acceptance, understanding, and the enduring power of love to transcend barriers of race, class, and expectation. In the quiet of that evening, 3 hearts beat in tentative harmony. A mother who had endured injustice, a son whose love refused to be hidden, and a father learning the profound lesson that true legacy is measured not in wealth, but in courage, empathy, and the strength to embrace truth. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, all 3 could envision a future where prejudice was not the measure of worth, where love could be celebrated rather than concealed, and where family could be defined by bonds of respect, understanding, and the unyielding courage to stand together. Weeks turned into months, and the mansion, once a place of cold opulence and rigid hierarchy, transformed into a space of cautious warmth. Julian's journey of self-reflection was ongoing, but the changes were tangible. He no longer sneered or spoke down to Lila. Instead, he listened, asked questions, and, most importantly, acknowledged her expertise and humanity. The household began to adjust to this shift, the staff cautiously optimistic, sensing a change in the family dynamic that could ripple far beyond the walls of the estate. Aaron and Lila thrived in the newfound openness, their bond stronger than ever. They no longer hid in shadows or feared judgment. Aaron's love, once confined by secrecy and fear, could now breathe freely, and Lila's heart, long hardened by years of struggle, felt a rare sense of liberation. Together, they began to plan a future that no longer needed to be hidden, a future where love, courage, and dignity defined their lives rather than fear or prejudice. Julian, though still grappling with the remnants of his old mindset, took deliberate steps toward reconciliation. He arranged a family dinner, inviting extended relatives whose expectations had long enforced conformity and judgment. The tension in the room was palpable at first, a clash of old-world pride against the undeniable reality of truth, love, and courage. But Julian, now guided by empathy, addressed the gathering with a sincerity that disarmed even the most skeptical relatives. "I have learned that legacy is not defined by wealth or appearances," Julian said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of months of reflection. "True legacy is measured by the courage to love, the humility to recognize wrongs, and the integrity to embrace truth. I ask you all to witness this moment, not as a threat to tradition, but as an opportunity to honor what is right and just." There was a long pause, the air thick with anticipation. Some relatives stiffened, unwilling to adjust their expectations. Others softened, recognizing the power of honesty and courage that had long been hidden in the shadows of the household. Lila remained composed, a quiet emblem of strength, while Aaron took her hand, grounding himself in the love that had guided both of them through years of uncertainty. The first gesture of acceptance came from Julian's aunt, a woman known for her sternness and adherence to tradition. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling slightly. Perhaps we have judged too harshly. The strength and dignity I see before me cannot be ignored." A ripple of acknowledgement passed through the room. The mansion, which had once been a stage for judgment and humiliation, now seemed alive with possibility. Conversations, hesitant but sincere, began to unfold. Julian listened, offered apologies where needed, and, most importantly, reinforced the message that love and dignity would no longer be diminished by prejudice or fear. Aaron's heart swelled with hope. The father he had longed to connect with was emerging not just as a parent, but as a man willing to learn, change, and embrace a reality that defied old prejudices. Lila, too, felt a rare sense of triumph, not in vengeance or superiority, but in the recognition of her courage and the validation of her love for her son. Outside the mansion, the world remained unchanged, with its biases and expectations. But within these walls, a revolution of the heart had taken root. Love, once constrained by fear, now had room to flourish. Courage, once hidden in quiet resilience, now commanded recognition. And family, once defined narrowly by blood and wealth, now embraced the expansive truth of shared humanity and unconditional support. One afternoon, as the sun cast a golden glow over the estate, Aaron and Lila walked through the gardens, free from the shadows of secrecy that had long defined their lives. Birds sang, leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, and the flowers they had planted together bloomed vibrantly, a symbol of resilience, growth, and the beauty of life nurtured against adversity. Aaron paused, turning to Lila. "We've come a long way," he said softly. "And yet, there's still so much to do. But for the first time, I feel hopeful." Lila smiled, a mix of pride, relief, and enduring strength in her eyes. "Hope is all we've ever needed," she replied. "Hope and the courage to stand together, even when the world expects us to fall apart." Julian appeared, joining them in the garden. He stood silently for a moment, observing the bond between mother and son, the love and resilience that had shaped their lives. Then he spoke, his voice carrying both humility and conviction. "I have learned from you both more than I ever thought possible. My mistakes, my prejudice, and my arrogance are mine to bear, but I intend to use what I've learned to guide, support, and protect the love and dignity that I once sought to control or diminish." Aaron's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of relief and joy. Lila reached out, placing a hand lightly on Julian's arm, a gesture of forgiveness and recognition. "It's never too late to change," she said. "And sometimes, the hardest lessons lead to the most meaningful growth." The days turned into weeks, each one reinforcing the fragile but enduring harmony that had begun to form. Julian continued to confront his own biases, learning to see people not as extensions of wealth, status, or prejudice, but as individuals deserving of respect, compassion, and dignity. He attended social gatherings with a new perspective, guided by empathy and humility rather than fear or arrogance. Aaron and Lila found joy in the small moments, shared laughter over breakfast, quiet walks through the gardens, evenings spent planning for a future that no longer needed to hide in shadows. They celebrated milestones together, each achievement a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of love. The community surrounding the Cartwright estate began to notice subtle changes. Staff were treated with respect, their voices valued and acknowledged. Guests saw a family that, while once rigid and intimidating, now embraced authenticity, empathy, and inclusivity. Word spread slowly, but inevitably, that the mansion was no longer a place of judgment, but a haven where love and dignity could flourish. Aaron and Lila's relationship became an emblem of courage and authenticity. They no longer feared prejudice or societal expectations, choosing instead to live openly and unapologetically. Their love, once confined by secrecy and fear, now radiated freely, inspiring those around them to reconsider their own assumptions and biases. Julian continued to evolve, his journey ongoing but undeniably real. He made mistakes, faced setbacks, and confronted lingering doubts, yet each challenge reinforced the lessons he had learned. That humility, empathy, and courage are the true measures of character, that love cannot be dictated by prejudice, and that families are strongest when founded on acceptance, respect, and understanding. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, Aaron, Lila, and Julian sat together in the garden. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, the quiet hum of life, and the sense of a future shaped by love and courage. Aaron looked at his mother and father, a profound sense of peace settling over him. "We've been through so much," he said softly, "and yet here we are, stronger, united, and hopeful." Lila reached out, taking both their hands. "The journey is never truly over," she said, "but the courage to face it together makes all the difference." Julian nodded, a rare smile breaking across his face. "I see that now, and I will continue to learn, to support, and to honor the love and dignity that defines this family. I may not be perfect, but I will strive to do what is right." As night fell, the mansion, once a symbol of rigid tradition and unyielding prejudice, stood as a testament to transformation, resilience, and hope. Shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer defined the present. Instead, they highlighted the triumph of courage, love, and the enduring human spirit. Aaron and Lila embraced, the culmination of years of struggle, fear, and perseverance. Julian stood beside them, not as a judge or authority, but as a father learning, growing, and choosing to honor the truth and love that had long been hidden. The future remained unwritten, filled with challenges, joys, and possibilities. But in that moment, they understood the most important lesson: that love, courage, and integrity can overcome prejudice, and that families, no matter how tested by the world, can emerge stronger when hearts are open, honest, and willing to embrace change. And so, under the quiet glow of the evening sky, the family once fractured by fear, prejudice, and secrecy found a fragile but profound harmony. They knew the journey would continue, that obstacles would arise, and that growth was never linear. Yet, with love as their guide, courage as their compass, and dignity as their foundation, they stepped forward together, ready to face the world with hope, unity, and the unwavering belief that truth and love, when honored, could transform even the most rigid of legacies. The mansion, its halls no longer echoing with judgment but with the quiet hum of life and connection, stood as a beacon not just of wealth or status, but of the profound, transformative power of love, courage, and resilience. Within its walls, the family had discovered that the greatest victories are not measured in power or control, but in the strength to stand together, the wisdom to embrace truth, and the courage to love openly, fearlessly, and unconditionally. And as the night deepened, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if acknowledging that even in a world shadowed by prejudice, hope, love, and courage would always find a way to light the path forward. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.